Hello, everyone, and welcome to another quick review discussion from me, the eponymous host of Experience Kills, Ben. And, as always, with me, my co-creator, my co-host, my compatriot, the only man I need in my life, Richard.
Hello. Do you know what eponymous means? I don't think you do.
No, I just picked that out of the air. I thought it sounded good.
Shall I educate you before we get into it?
Educate me on eponymous, yeah. What's eponymous?
Eponymous is when the name of the thing is the same as the person. So
it'd be like Experience Kills was actually called Ben.
Yes, exactly.
Well, maybe we should rename it, Richard.
Just call it Ben?
Just call it Ben. Just as a YouTube channel. There's a simplicity to it, isn't there?
Alright, I ain't doing all that logo work again, though. You can do...
No, that's fair enough. Do you know what also has the opposite of a simplicity-related name, which is Genesis Alpha 1, which is, in many reasons, why we are here to talk about video games, because that's the whole point of this particular review discussion. But we've already digressed massively into possibly more interesting territory than anything the game actually brings up. But that's being a tiny bit mean. Richard, would you like me to tell you about Genesis Alpha 1?
If you wouldn't mind, yeah, please. Because I'm getting over a cold, so what you can do is tell me all about the game and also give me an excuse not to splutter everywhere, if that's okay.
That might be a good idea. I like that. How we can make you not cough by me doing all the talking.
That's a plan, isn't it? Let's do that.
So Genesis Alpha 1 is brought to us by Team 17, publisher of such games as Worms and recently Planet Alpha and things like that. And we've also got the Radiation Blue developer, which is this small studio in Germany that's put out this game under Team 17's publishing umbrella. And what they sort of call this game is a roguelike survival management building game, because it's all of those things, and sadly it does some elements a lot better than others. One of the things that drew me to this game that actually made me want to look at it in a review format was that it's got a really cool 70s sci-fi aesthetic. You probably picked up that from seeing the trailers and the screenshots and things like that. Very reminiscent of Alien and things like Silent Running and stuff like that, making me think of those giant greenhouse ships that they have in Silent Running and stuff like that.
I'm so psyched that you know that, because I was going to actually talk about Silent Running.
Oh, dude, that was literally the first thing I thought of when I saw the videos for this. I was like, I want to play that game just because that look, that vibe, so cool. And the coolest element of this game is the management. It is the construction screen. There is a dedicated spaceship construction interface in which you can plug new modules and corridors, greenhouses, bio bays, cloning labs, workshops, crew quarters, and really customize out this big hulking colony ship that is sent across the stars. It doesn't really look in any way aerodynamic or even realistically constructible, but it's got that vibe, and it works really well in conveying that 70s sci-fi vibe. Then the other half of the game is all your interactions inside the ship, and sometimes on planetary surfaces in first person, which is where the game falls down. The first person actual controls, the first person gameplay feels very, very, very clunky and poorly tuned. You move too quickly at times. You don't feel like you can be accurate enough with the weapons when you are dealing with the enemies, and then you are forced to do sort of interface in these different environments, in these different sort of constructed buildings. For example, I might be in the tractor bay room, but to actually make the tractor beam work a bit quicker, to like pick up debris, which is one of the ways you can get resources in this game, you have to sort of hold the left trigger at a computer screen and watch a bar fill up. And it just feels arbitrary. Now, you can, of course, assign crew members to these rooms to automate these processes, but the crew are a finite resource, which you then need to use a cloning blade to replenish when they get killed, because they will get killed. And then if you get killed, you inhabit another one of the clone bodies that you've created for your crew. And, of course, this is going to happen a lot, because it's a survival game. Now, the main threat in this comes from aliens, like arachnid-style creatures that you might either encounter when you're doing resource-gathering missions on a planet, or might just find themselves on the ship when they sort of hitch a ride, within a tractor beam. And that's a fine idea, that's great, but the problem comes from these all being little scuttling creatures on the ground, which half the time you can't see, and then the other half the time there's no indication. When you're starting to take damage, there's no real indication of where it's coming from.
Why can't you see them?
Because they're just so small, and they kind of just disappear into the quite large room designs that you'll find yourself in. For example, in the tractor beam room, which is where early on you're going to encounter these enemies the most, It's on like a split level design, so that there's actually a sub floor beneath the floor that the actual tractor beam comes out onto. And a lot of the time, the enemies will be underneath you, and you can hear them scuttling around, and your crew, if there's any in that room at the time, will be like yelping in fear. But good luck actually locating them and finding them. So you'll often just running around trying to spot these tiny little spider enemies or slug enemies that are, are going to nip at your heels and kill you eventually. But it's just trying to actually see them to shoot them with your quite poor feeling first-person shooter gun aspects. It just doesn't work. It's the feedback doesn't work, and the whole experience, because the controls don't quite work, and the acceleration of the targeting doesn't feel right, and it all just feels very, very sloppy. And it's a shame because, like I said, the construction aspects, the management aspects, and the survival aspects in every way except the gunplay work quite nicely. And the idea of building a hangar and sending ships out to planets, which you can do completely, again, automated. You don't have to go on those missions. But if you do, then that gunplay aspect is then magnified by tenfold, because you're dealing with a whole lot more enemies on these planetary surfaces. And even on the easy planets, you still get swarmed and killed very, very quickly. And it's just not fun. It just doesn't feel good. And it's a shame. Maybe they should have just yanked out the survival roguelike element and just made it about management. Because the idea of customizing this, huge spaceship that's going to become like a small town in space and sending it across the stars to colonize distant galaxies with, the different DNA and stuff you can collect as you go to create different types of clones with different resistances and different strengths and weaknesses. That's really cool. But then the core of the game, the gunplay, just, oh man, it falls down so hard on that.
So have you actually got to use it, or is there some option there to automate a lot of the action?
You can automate a lot of it, yeah. I mean, the thing I've noticed, if you gather enough of the right types of resources, you can say build turrets, and then you can say set up 2 or 3 turrets in the tractor room so that whenever those aliens do board, you'll kill it. The other area that the aliens get on board from a lot of is obviously the hangar. They come back with the resource collection ships. And then, you can just have these battles that go on for a really protracted amount of time, because you'll be in this room, there's enemies in there. The music changes, for example, so there's enemies in there. But good luck in this cavernous environment with nooks and crannies everywhere, finding these tiny scuttling like spider or slug-like creatures that just, there might just be one enemy in there. And then you'll feel like you've cleared everything out, you've scoured every centimetre of it, and all of a sudden there'll be more. So it does feel like they actually are spawning them in near you as the player character to create action beats that don't actually make sense some of the time. And it's just a frustration that kind of spoils the overall feeling of the game, yeah.
Shame. So how do they even get on? Is it just internal battles in the ship, or do you have to shoot stuff that's outside?
I haven't experienced any space combat as such, but they're like I said, when you go on the missions to the planetary surface to collect resources, they're always like the planets might have a different hue to them, like all green, blue, red, but they're generally these sort of slightly barren-esque environments that are just, there's nothing there except maybe some fauna, and then you're just getting attacked by hordes of these scuttling creatures. And there's some variety to them, but at the end of the day, they all seem to have the same attack, which is charge at you and nip at your heels until you're dead. But it's frustrating because just keeping track of the directions they're coming from and where you're taking damage from is really difficult. And because they're so small and they're really close in, you're just spinning around on the spot trying to see them and kill them before you die, because you don't take a lot of damage in this game before you get killed. So it's quite punishing in that regard. I also found the early game sort of resource collection loop and where to focus your resources is quite difficult. If, for example, you make a few construction choices poorly, you will be severely punished because you basically cripple your ability to collect more resources for what you required to then actually develop the ship in the way that you need to progress. So you can have to find yourself in positions where you just have to restart the game. It happened to me a couple of times, so it's actually quite punishing in that regard in the early game. But a few trial and error missions, and you do get the hang of the beginning loops and stuff, and you learn to be quite cautious with how you're spending stuff and really think through the build queues and stuff before putting down a new module. But it's difficult because I got really excited at the idea of building out a spaceship like that. Loads of greenhouses make it look just like something out of Silent Running or Alien, but actually it's a very slow process, and the pace of the game in general is slow. You need to be methodical. You need to be planning things out and taking your time. It's certainly a unique experience. Yeah. Anything you wanted to ask me, Rich, before we sort of wrap this up?
It just seems like a very overly ambitious title, doesn't it? Where they've got the basics right in terms of the management sim aspects, and then decided that they want to flesh it out with all these action bits that don't quite work. It would almost be better if they hadn't bothered with that, by the sounds of it, and just focused on what it is and what it does well.
Yeah.
I wonder why they chose to do that.
I'm not sure what the sort of the development pyramid was, what came first, what aspects came into it. I love an indie game that, you know, we see it quite often, and it's something I almost want to reward, is when they shoot for the moon and they don't quite achieve it. You can see some really interesting ideas and thoughts here, but yeah, at the end of the day, the core movement, the core shooting of the first person side of it, interface in general, is just clunky, and it's not like it's not polished, because I think this is where they wanted it to go, but it's some poor sort of design choices along the way have kind of crippled what would have been a really fun experience. I would love to see more from Radiation Blue. I really like the direction this concept is going. I love that aesthetic so much. It looks so cool. When you're building the ship in the sort of wireframe blueprint mode, it's brilliant. I just want more of that. And then there are also some really evocative sort of framing cutscenes around the beginning of the game as well, which work just perfectly for this type of game. But yeah, it's just hampered by that core mechanic. So yeah, I can't say I wholeheartedly recommend Genesis Alpha 1, but I would say if you're looking for something very, very different to play, there's nothing quite like this on console, that's for sure. So yeah,
I think it's fairly budget as well, isn't it? So it's easy to pick up.
Yeah, it's not a full price, £50 game or whatever. No, it's in the 20 area, I think, that sort of thing. So I think that brings us to the end of another episode of Experience Kills. Please head over to Twitter to follow us at Experience Kills. And while you're on the YouTube page, hit a like and subscribe. That really helps. And I want to point out that if you're watching this on YouTube, if you don't have the time to maybe watch all of these videos, we do also offer the audio for all of our videos as well, with a dedicated RSS feed. And links to that can be found on our Twitter and in the description of this video. So yeah, I've been Ben, which you can find at DIYE, and he's been Richard.
I'm Richard. You can find me at Colonel Red on Twitter.
Yeah, and we'll be back soon with much more. Bye-bye.
Bye.